There's a lot of talk about the big changes to the YouTube algorithm, and one of the biggest ones that you hear the most is that YouTube's algorithm is now powered by Gemini. That's the large language model that Google owns. And this got me to thinking, with so much advice about how to grow on YouTube, especially as a small channel that's just getting started, why not, instead of going to YouTube videos, why don't I go to the source itself? Why don't I ask Gemini the questions about how to succeed on YouTube and see if it can give me a little look under the hood into the giant black box that the YouTube algorithm really is. I'll hear all the time where it's like, it's the audience, not the algorithm, which is true. But I think that a big thing people forget is that when you're starting out, if you make the best video in the world, if it's sent to the wrong people, you really don't have any chance. It's the same thing as making a video and then YouTube giving it 5 impressions. So let's see if Gemini reveals if there's any secrets to growing on YouTube. And honestly, after doing this, there was some information that came out of here that quite surprised me. And I think you're gonna find some very interesting insights in this video. All right, we have Gemini pulled up. I have written out some of the things that I feel like I would wanna ask about YouTube. And this kind of comes based off of the YouTube channels that I'm running. Over the past year, I grew my first channel to about 1,700 subscribers, monetized it in 7 months, and also started generating a little bit of ad revenue, which was great. But this new channel, Creator Control Group, basically is starting back from zero. And so I wanna know, what are the things that are gonna kind of give this a boost? So those are some of the questions are kind of based around. It's gonna be thinking about, what are some of the things that a new or brand new channel can do that can really just give it the best chance at getting some more traction early on? And give me a thumbs up if you like the 2 kids under 2 hairstyle. This is what I've been rocking a lot nowadays. If you're a parent with young kids, you know what I'm talking about. Usually with these large language models, you need to prompt them and tell them how they're going to act. So I said, hey Gemini, act as a YouTube recommendation engineer. When answering, prioritize patterns observed across channels rather than official YouTube statements or creator anecdotes. I think that's important. We want to see if it will just give us some more of the raw data rather than just parroting back all the things that people have said across that. That's what we're going to want to get through. That's just the noise in the signal that we're trying to get past. And so for the first question, I asked, since you are powering the YouTube algorithm now, is there a certain threshold for average view duration and click-through rate that you're looking for to give the video more impressions? It looks like a lot of the suggestions are what we've heard a lot as well, which checks out, that's good. So that usually an average range is 4 to 7% as a click-through rate. Okay, so it's very common. You get a better performance push if you get 8 to 10 or higher. That's where it's gonna give you more stuff. And obviously there's a trade-off where as you are pushed out to a wider audience, usually your click-through rate will go down. Now it says for the traffic source that it's expecting a higher click-through rate for search. Obviously that makes sense. It's very focused on what you're looking for if it's search-based. But then for suggested, it says 7 to 12%. The funny thing is I've always found that usually when I get suggested content, that the click-through rate on that is the lowest. Like suggested content always feels like the worst kind of impressions to get. It's the lowest quality ones. Browse is really where it's at. That's the one where it says, oh, in browse, you'll get 2 to 5%. It's a broad audience, lower intent. That makes sense intrinsically, but I feel like once YouTube knows what your channel's about, then that browse traffic becomes much more valuable. And usually you get a much higher click-through rate on browse than suggested. All right, for average view duration, it favors videos that keep people on YouTube longer. That's true, of course. So 40% is often set as the minimum threshold. I've heard that as well. There's a buddy of mine, Jay, who talks about once his video drops below 40, usually that's where the rate starts to tank a bit. So that kind of holds up there. 50 to 60% average view duration is good for most content. That's pretty high, I think, especially for smaller channels. I think it's really hard to get that higher amount of view duration. All right, so my follow-up question is, okay, it sounds like what I've mainly heard. I have noticed that on my new channel, I barely get any browse traffic and get a majority on suggested, which I've usually gotten the lowest CTR from. Is there a reason why I get more suggested versus browse on videos, specifically on new channels? Let's ask it that. Okay, so it's saying that suggested is kind of the data scout phase for it. That's kind of like its initial testing phase. Okay, so this is saying that usually you only get more browse after you've proved yourself a little bit in the suggested, which is the high relevant context. So it's saying that it puts your video out in a very related context and tries to see if people will, one, click on your video from suggested, and then after suggested, they will stay and watch your video for a long period of time. And then it will give you more browse. Now that seems really difficult, I think. One of probably the main roadblocks for new channels to really get more traction is because I think suggested content, while it might be the most related, often I feel like has the smallest amount of pull for someone else. Someone's usually watching a video they're already interested in, and usually rather than going and looking through all the suggested content for the next piece of content that I want to consume, I'm going to just go back to browse and see if the YouTube algorithm will cook up something new for me that I'm going to be interested in. So I feel like it's going to be rather hard, honestly, to get the good feedback from that unless what you're offering from that video is so novel and interesting and crazy that when they see it in a suggested video, they're like, whoa, I gotta click on that. I gotta see what's going on there. And that's not always the type of videos that creators are making when they're starting on a new channel. It's not always the Mr. Beast kind of crazy videos. You're like, oh, I gotta see what's happening there. That's interesting. All right, let's take a closer look into engagement thresholds. Also, if you want to see the full transcript of the responses and everything I asked ChatGPT, I'm going to put a Google Doc link in the description, and you can access that link for free to check out all the information that Gemini has given me on these questions I've asked. Ah, yes. The core question that drives every YouTube recommendation engineer. It's very funny of it to say that. Yes, and all these things it's saying, having good packaging, delivering on your promise, and a hook that works. Yes. Of course, those are all foundational things in having a video succeed. Yes, clearly. Now this is something that I feel like I've heard before as well, is that it's kind of like what it calls a clickbait penalty. And that's basically if a lot of people click on your video, your thumbnail is definitely drawing them in, but right off the bat, they start watching it and they're like, ugh, like, I don't want to watch this. This happens to me, like, say if I click on a video and it's just an AI voiceover, I'm out of there in the next 2 seconds. So I think that is something where it's like the system will realize quickly your thumbnail kind of misled them in some way. There's something that wasn't adding up to the expectation of the viewer. That's why it's so important when you have a video to really match the viewer's expectation of the video right off the bat. But of course, on the other hand, it does say if you have a low click-through rate, but your average view duration stays high, then it'll just slowly grow, that's good to hear. And then yes, of course, what you want, if you have a high click-through rate and high average view duration, that's like the magic sauce. That's the thing that's gonna make your video go out to tons of people. All right, let's ask the question to see if there's something that we can do to increase future impressions in that first 48-hour viewer window. And we'll add a little more specifics to it. Let's see if it'll give us a little more information on being pushed in browse or suggested, and if there's certain signals that kind of make more sense for that. Oh, okay, that's interesting. A lot of people I think are saying that descriptions and tags are kind of dead, but this one is saying that a high priority is having your title, description, and tags match what the algorithm scans in the video. So it's kind of like, okay, does your description, the tags used, does that match when it scans the video and takes all the data from that? Does it match together? So kind of like having both those work together seems like it prioritized that in high way. Okay, that's really good to know, actually. And it also apparently looks like it says that what total watch time is your video accumulated connected to a certain search term. So if your user clicks on a video from a search result and stayed longer, then it'll rank higher. Okay, so that's actually a way that you can rank your video higher, is if your total watch time or your view duration is high based on if someone searches it. So it's taking that data too. Very interesting. All right, and it also looks like Gemini is saying the highest priority is the average view duration, which is what I always believe is that if you get people to watch a video for a long time, that's one of the most positive signals that you can give to the platform. Basically, it's the ultimate quality signal. It's the number one thing for audience satisfaction. You stayed and you watched the whole video. That's how you know that you got a satisfied person on that. And especially with everyone with the attention span of a goldfish, it's getting harder and harder to have a video that a majority of people will actually stay and watch the whole thing. Yep, session watch time is a high thing. Okay, we've heard that too. Does the video keep the viewer on YouTube, or do they go to a different platform? That's important too. Oh, and then velocity. How fast are the views hitting? So that's why it's like YouTube a lot of times can be a compounding effect. If you start to get views that will actually snowball, is once you get a bunch of views in a row, then it's going to be like, oh, something's happening here. And it's going to try to push it out a little farther. I feel like YouTube is really optimized to respond very quickly to things that happen. That's, I think, oftentimes how videos can be dormant for almost a year and then they can blow up, is they're connected to a search term. There's a new video that's very popular that links to it. A lot of people go to that one and it sees that traffic spike and YouTube's like, whoa, we got to start recommending this video. And that's usually what happens. All right, what should a new channel prioritize? Sure, let's look at that. Prioritize search. Yes, I totally believe this. If you're a new channel, one of the best ways to get more traction is to prioritize your search options. Because if you're not getting the browse and suggested traffic from the algorithm, you need to get another way. And there's 3 billion people that are searching on YouTube every single day. That's a lot of search volume. So if you prioritize stuff for search, that's going to definitely guarantee that you're going to get more traffic, especially like it says here, if it's low competition and long tail search queries. So basically gives a lot of different specific details about a product or thing or how to do something in it. I actually did a video recently about how to win the YouTube lottery where I talk about this kind of thing and how this optimizes for channels. So you can go check that out as well. Option click, that way you can keep watching this video. It's funny because it's true. Why do some videos get strong early metrics but then flatline? What usually causes the algorithm to stop expanding distribution? That's a solid question. So some of the things it brings up is that your click-through rate does collapse on a broader audience. So if it plummets too much when it puts out to a wider audience, then it knows that that video is not going to do well. The average view duration mismatch with the click, that's the clickbait penalty. And then saturation in the relevant pool. It's true if there's a lot of content in one and you're just a tiny channel with no background on that and not really much data, then it's going to be very hard for you to stand out in a very saturated niche still. You kind of got to get a little lucky when it comes to that. Let's see when we should recalibrate, because honestly, I think there's a big debate when it comes to the initial 48 hours of if the click rate is kind of low initially, when do you change it? Because you're not really getting a wide enough thing to really know. Like on really big channels, they get so many views and impressions that they can make these adjustments quite quickly, and it's very meaningful for them to change the thumbnail or the title or that kind of stuff. For a smaller channel, it might not make that much difference because you're just not getting the volume. So when your click-through rate drops down low, it might not even necessarily be that you have a bad title and thumbnail. You could have just gotten served to the wrong people. So trying to change that too early might not actually be helpful. So I think the question is there a time when you should change it early on if you're only getting a few impressions? So I asked, I know the CTR can fluctuate a lot in the first 24 to 48 hours. When is it a good time to change my title and thumbnail if the CTR is low? All right, so it looks like Gemini is recommending that the best optimal time to change your thumbnail if you are having a lower CTR is at the first 24-hour mark. So it says that is the best time. It says the first impression pushes over and the algorithm is starting to limit its distribution. So that's a good time to switch it up if it's falling lower than average. And for this one, it's saying if it's under 5%, that could be a time when you wouldn't want to change it. And then from the first 24 hours, if it's lower than your channel average. Now, of course, if you're just starting out, you don't really have much of an average, but I think you definitely want to try to get it to at least 3%. I think that's kind of like the bare minimum low bar if you can. Now, I think this last thing that it says is actually the most important point. It says that if you have low impressions, that is unreliable data. So basically, if you only have a few hundred impressions, that's not going to give you the data that you need to actually make an informed decision. You really can't tell accurately on that little bit of data. Really, data is the most important thing. And if you don't get enough impressions and you don't get enough, then you could actually have a decent thumbnail, but you don't really know. So a low click-through rate on your title and thumbnail, you really don't know anything yet at that point. You really got to wait and see until you get a little more data before you can make an accurate decision. All right, things are heating up a little bit here. Let's look at audience satisfaction. So I said, are certain metrics weighted more heavily for audience satisfaction? For example, between likes and average view duration, comments or shares, are there certain ones that hold more weight in the calculations? All right, highest average view duration, we know that. Session watch time is the next highest, as well as the first 30 seconds retention. Okay, interesting. Tier 2, secondary singles, comments, shares, and likes. It looks like comments, it's saying, is weighting the highest of those different ones. Is that it weights if you get more comments, because the comments require the most effort from the viewer and singling deep engagement often at the beginning of the community. Okay. That makes sense. And then shares and likes are the next ones that are a little bit lower. Okay, and then of course, tier 3, we have negative signals, and that is negative feedback. Viewers clicking not interested or don't recommend this channel. Okay, yep, we definitely don't want that. And then dislikes, basically people disliking your content. Obviously, that's not a good sign. All right, for the next one, let's say, I've noticed certain metrics for new channels are weighted heavily for giving more suggested traffic and fewer browse. Is there a way to optimize for getting more browse impressions over other ways when starting out? It says the 3 ways is focus on a universal click-through rate angle. Okay, a hyper-relevant, basically broad appeal and curiosity. That makes sense if you have something that has a wider audience of people that are going to actually watch it and consume it rather than just a handful of people that would be interested. That's going to work better. That makes sense. Topical versus evergreen topics. So instead of doing the evergreen ones, it's good to do ones that are topical. So basically things that are currently trending. It's very true. Since YouTube is a search-based platform, If you do stuff that is more search-based and that's trending right then, you're gonna get a much lower likelihood that people are searching for that with intent and are going to click on a video that is topical and trending at the moment, rather than just broad generic ones that people are always searching for. There's tons of evergreen content out there. You really have to find specific evergreen content that people haven't made yet. And that's getting smaller and smaller as the days go along. Maximize session starters. Interesting. Okay, so optimize the content type. So a top 10 list, concise tutorials. Okay, yep, that makes sense. And session continuation check. Basically, if you have other things that make a viewer then watch another video, YouTube likes content that is basically recommending people to stay on the platform. That makes sense. Golden rule, browse impressions equals high CTR, verified average view duration, a high velocity of views, and broad appeal. Okay, I mean, that's what we've basically heard from every person nowadays so far. So that's not really telling us too much new, but it still doesn't really tell us how to leverage more of those as a small channel. That's what's hard to get on some of these things. I think one thing that I've thought about is I feel like A/B testing almost doesn't quite do much because you just don't have the data. So I wonder if actually it's better to just do a single thumbnail than to A/B test. So let's ask it that. I feel like with so little data from small channels, is A/B testing even helpful? Do you get any extra impressions from doing multiple thumbnails versus one? If I don't get enough impressions, even if one ranks higher, it might not be statistically significant. Yes, exactly. So basically this is just saying if you only get 500 impressions, you get a low amount of impressions, then a click-through rate on one or the other is probably more just chance than actually data behind it. A/B testing can get rid of a catastrophically bad thumbnail. That's true if one of yours is just horribly bad. Of course, I think if you understand the basics of thumbnail design and how to make a good, compelling thumbnail, then you're not really gonna have one that's just catastrophically bad. I stand by the saying that a lot of this really is luck-based at the beginning. You really have to get your video in front of the right people that are gonna click and watch. And when you're a small channel, it's really hard to get YouTube the data for that. That's why pushing to create more content that's very specific to your niche to give YouTube more data of who to push your videos out to, and then link all of those videos to each other, like one big connective tissue, that is gonna be the thing that helps your channel out the most. You are basically increasing the odds and the amount of chances that you have people are gonna find one of them and then get onto your channel. And of course, if you can make it optimized by search, that's gonna give you the biggest boost at the beginning too. Hope this was helpful, and here's the lottery video that I referenced in this video that you can go check out. It's a good one if you haven't seen it, and we'll see you over there.